All right. So, I kind of wanted to wrap up the conference with something that I want to make sure everybody knows. And to me, these are the 7, there's lots of important things to make a successful project, but these are 7 things that, I think are important for every single project. I don't care what kind of project it is, whether it's a big internal application, small internal application, a public application, all these things need to happen. They might change a little bit, but, basically you need all these things. And so that's what I wanted to talk about for my keynote. And it just so happens that these things, most everything in my talk has been talked about already at the conference, which is great. I'm glad I picked this subject. So those of you who don't know me, I'm David McCarter. I'm a Microsoft C# Corner MVP, award-winning developer, architect, consultant, blah, blah, blah. I love playing music, as you all know, if you've been following me. There's my email address, Twitter handle, and LinkedIn. And so please contact me. Let me know not only if you need some help or you like the conference or your company needs me, because I'm looking for a new contract or full-time gig right now. So please contact me. I don't get enough contact. This is what I'm trying to say. All right. So after I got most of this keynote done, I figured that, everything I'm saying here, I hope you developers out there know this. So I decided to put the last line in there going, this keynote is really for management, because I don't know about, other developers out there, but management is a big roadblock to me in most cases to get things done correctly and with quality and with performance, really, but mostly the quality. Because management, I've said this until I'm blue in the face, management really doesn't care about quality. All they care about is shipping features, because that's what makes money. Who cares about quality? We do, because we're the ones who are going to have to deal with it. So do you want to deal with bugs all the time, or do you want to deal with no bugs and do features? I think the answer is pretty obvious, right? So, make sure you download this keynote and send it to all of your managers and project managers, because they need this, because I don't know how to get it through their head. So this is what the keynote's all about. But if you don't know any of these things, then I hope you're going to learn something too. So, and this has kind of been said during the conference already, but how many times have you heard this? Our software features 0 errors and 0 warnings. Never. I've never seen a marketing ad that said that, right? Because like I said, nobody cares about that. All they care about is the selling features so they can make money, right? And they don't go around saying this, because most companies can't say this. If you ask me, well, at least most companies I go to can never say this when they bring me in. And the whole purpose a lot of companies bring me in is to fix this. And so I see a lot of bad code these days, and it's quite frightening, if you ask me. So you never hear anybody say this, right? So this is what I'm going to try to wrap this conference up is talking about these things that every successful project needs to have. And I've done everything in this talk, and the reason I have had 6 very successful projects is because I do these things. And I've been doing most of these things my entire career, if not all of it. And so like I said, things change as, software development changes, but I've been doing pretty much all this my entire career. And I can't stress how important these things are. All right, so the first thing I want to talk about is architecture, because, I think I've already said this during the conference. This is so lacking these days from most teams I go in and work at. It's like pulling teeth to get anybody to do architecture or do any kind of documentation these days. I don't know what happened. Like I said, I kind of blame some of it on Agile, but it's super important, So all of you developers out there, if you think this, or your manager tells you to just sit down and start coding, stop. Tell them no. We need to stop. We need to architect it. We need to document it, because a lot of those reasons that have already been talked about during this conference is why this is super, super important. I've spent months just architecting and documenting data objects, right? I spend a lot of time doing this. And, I've said this a lot. You might have heard this in this world, but if you spend most of your day coding, you are doing it wrong. You should not be spending most of your day coding. The most of your day should be doing other things like architecture, analyzing, testing. Coding should be the least part of your job, really. I know this sounds weird, but that's definitely true. So you must architect and document any project from the get-go, or feature. Even if you're adding a feature to an existing project, you need to architect it and document it. I can't stress this enough, because I've already said this, most of my successful projects were all due to doing this properly. And everyone that's been successful has done this, to some degree or another. And so, what do I mean by properly? Well, properly to me, part of that means meet with the users and understand their needs, right? I say this because I haven't heard a lot of this, but I'm one of the developers that want to talk to the users, right? I've left companies because they wouldn't let me talk to the users. Because if I don't know the user's needs, I can't improve whatever I'm trying to improve for them. And hearing it second or third party is not the same as sitting down, spending a whole day with the users. I've got many stories about this, but I've spent days with users just watching what they're doing and just understanding their current workflow or whatever they're doing, because my job for most of my career is to make somebody's workflow or life better, right? And I can't do that unless I talk to them and see what they're doing now, so I can improve that. This is so important. And like I said, I've left companies because I've asked them, please send me a day with the actual people using the product. And they refused. And I said, see you later. I'll find another company who will let me do what I want. So you must meet with them, right? And then you must architect and document the project. I can't stress documentation enough. And I'm really, really frustrated that, I see so little documentation these days, and even less of architecture. So all the time you spend with architecture and documentation, which will increase, the time in the beginning of the project, but you will save immense amount of time and money later in the project, right? At the last team I worked on, they worked on a project that I architected. I coded most of it. And one of the other more junior people in the team, after we had to make some, changes, improvements to it, she came back to me and said, "Oh my gosh, Dave, it is so easy to make changes in this code base." I go, yes, that's why I do this. I've succeeded. If it's easy to make changes and it's easy for a junior person to understand, I've succeeded, right? But this all starts with architecture. And then once you come up with the architecture, go back and talk to the users about the solution that you came up with and see if it's going to gel with their team or their company, right? Because, the one thing I love to do is whenever I go to a doctor's or dentist appointment, and they always use their, software to put in your information and look at your records and things like that. Every single doctor and nurse I see do that. I ask them, "So how do you like this?" And they all hate it. None of them like the software. And I go, yep, that's because the people writing the software haven't come to talk to you. And so they don't know what they're doing. I'm a software engineer. I don't know how medical people do their work, right? So for me, writing software for them is kind of silly unless I understand their needs and work with them on improving it, right? I'm going to check the private chat real quick. So, one of the most successful projects I've worked on, unfortunately, was like 20 years ago. But it was actually I was part of the original development department for proflowers.com. And, I'm not going to go into the long story. I've written about it already. But basically, the system that I architected and wrote most of it for them ended up being patented. So now I'm a patented inventor now. And it's because of what I wrote. You can go Google me and look up the invention. But I invented that along with my CTO and one other guy that helped with the coding. But, I'm so proud of this project because, not only did I become a patent inventor, which is cool, but, it doesn't make me any money. I learned a lot from this process. But the reason I call it successful is the users loved it, right? And even users that never used a computer before could use my application. And users that don't speak English could use my application. That's because if I make the users happy, I've succeeded, right? That's why I'm here, right? So this is my greatest. I have other examples, but this is the greatest one because it's patented. Sorry, I moved off of PowerPoint. So good architecture equals long living projects. Projects last a long time sometimes. I mean, there's projects written, 10, 15, 20 years ago that's still running, right? So it creates long living projects. I rarely know any team that writes a project that's only going to be around 3 months, right? So you want them long living, and architecture will give you that. But the best thing is architecture will allow you to make changes easily. Good architecture will. Less bugs and other issues, right? Who likes working on bugs? Not a single person, right? And that's why a lot of developers leave after the first release of something, because then it's just bug fixing all the time. And that's not any fun. I don't like doing bugs. I like creating features, and I like creating things out of nothing, right? That's what I love. I don't like fixing bugs. And you create projects other people talk about, like my patented invention. You want people to talk about your project and how you came up with it, or how you architected, or how your team did flow, like Woody was talking about. You want people to talk about these kind of successes, and then you can in the case of me, I turn those into talks. I turn them into articles. I put them I put that information into my book. And so, yeah, everything. And in fact, doing this will save money in the long run. Unfortunately, too many companies in the bean counters, the accountants, don't see this. They don't see the long-term cost. They only see the immediate cost. And it's a huge problem. And most companies, especially, I said earlier, the bigger the company, the worse this is. And so this will actually save money. I guarantee it. Guarantee it. Otherwise, I'll work for you for free. I should have said that. It makes changes easier. Changes must be easy. I one of the last meetings I had with vice presidents and stuff at one company, I told them, look, until you break down and do X, Y, and Z, what you're asking is either A, impossible, or B, will take so long, our competitor is going to beat us. And guess what happened? Both those things. And the product is not doing well anymore. So you must be able to make changes easily, including swapping databases, right? I know that sounds crazy, but you should be able to swap it out pretty easily. It will make you happy. When you, like what he was talking, when you're all in the zone, you're all working together, you all create something from nothing that the users love. That's the best feeling to me. It's not the money. It's not the money. It's that feeling. And you will learn and keep your job. All these things, whether it's good or bad, you learn from them, hopefully. And good architecture, you will learn, right? And the more you learn up front will save you a lot later. And most important of all, of architecture, this is going to create happy users. Happy users equal satisfaction to me. But in a lot of cases, it means you get to keep your job, or maybe you get a big raise, or maybe you get a big bonus, right? Your users are happy, it trickles down, right? Otherwise, you're going to be left with users like this, like all the HBO Max users from last night, right? That are all tweeting about the mistake that HBO Max did with 44 million customers yesterday. It's pretty crazy. And This is usually the way I feel when I use apps these days. And the reason I talk about this so much and so with so much passion is because I hate feeling like this. I want to feel happy. And unfortunately, most apps I use make me feel like this. And so I want to improve it. And this is my way of improving it. All right, so let's move off of architecture. And now we're going to go to coding standards, near and dear to my heart, of course. Very important for the developers on your project. And we're going to be talking about that. So why are standards needed? You know, when I do this talk in person, I ask, I ask the audience, why, if you use coding standards, why do you do that? And here's some of the reasons. Every programmer on the same page, right? One of the speakers, I don't know if it was Woody or Jason, was talking about onboarding, new coders, right? At one company I worked at, it would take 6 months before new coders would kind of understand, what the project was or what the product was. That's way too long. So if you use common standards that are out, common standards that are in my book, right? It'll be a lot easier for your programmers to understand it and read it and know exactly what's happening, right? If we all use our own way of coding and standards, this becomes a huge mess and it's unworkable. And usually we have to spend a lot of time rewriting it. So we don't want to do that. Easier to read and understand code. Very, very important. Code needs to be readable, right? Because, the more you stare at it, trying to figure out what is wrong with it so you can fix a bug, the more money you waste. And so it must be easy to read, must be understandable. So stop using really short variable names and parameter names. We don't need to do that anymore. It's not the 90s, so make sure everything is readable in your code. Don't make, big, long method names, but, concise and to the point. Code should be self-documenting, actually, in most cases. Easy to maintain code. I always say, how many times have you've written a code, you've put it out to the public and never touched again? Yeah, 0, right? So you have to make sure you use standards to make it very, very easy to maintain code, because like I said, maintaining code, fixing bugs, all this is a drain on resources and money, and we need to make that easier. So that's where coding standards can help. And in the end, if you follow everything that, coding standards, including, of course, what's in my book, you're going to end up with stable, reliable code, right? That's what we want. We don't want bugs, right? We don't want, the bugs like we've been, experiencing here in the StreamYard today, right? So I guarantee you, coding standards will produce this for you. So I know I've plugged my book. This is not the reason I'm doing this, this section. I'm doing this section because it's super, super important. So, if you don't have coding standards at work, please go pick up a copy of my book and create your own standards. Also, you can pick up my code and app performance book too, which has got all the performance stuff in it. And like I said, because you need to have a standard, right? It needs to be written. It needs to be documented in a single place and easier for developers to get to. Most companies, 99% of the companies I go to have no standards, none at all, right? It's whatever you want to do. And that's just crazy. And it's even more important to have standards if you use contractors, right? Because contractors like me are there for a short time. So they're even worse at standards because they can, I'm going to be gone in 6 months. Who cares, right? But it's super, super important when you have contractors. In my last company, everybody got a copy of my book. Other companies I've worked at, every developer in the company got a copy of my book. And because we all need to be on the same page, right, when we're writing code. And after selecting a standard, like I said, I already said this, make it easily available to each programmer, right? It should be right. This book should be right next to your desk, unless you're me, because I wrote it. Or whatever standard you have, it needs to be, you need to have it all the time. So you make sure you're not doing anything the wrong way. And on top of that, you need to enforce it either by doing code reviews, pair programming, And you can enforce it in the build process, right? Jason was showing a lot of the analyzer stuff. There's other ways you can check your code during the build process, but if you're not checking your code for standards during the build, you need to stop and start doing it, right? Because how do you know the code is correct if you don't check it during build, right? Code reviews and pair programming will catch most of it, but not all of it. But if you include it in the build process, it will catch all of it. And don't release the code until it meets the standards, and make the developer go back. I've done this. I've even done this with the team in the Ukraine. I said, nope, not accepting this code until it passes, the coding standards testing and everything. So my big tip for this section is only change your standards on purpose. And if you do change them, document them, and then teach that to the rest of the team. You just can't, tell the team, yeah, go read it as your leisure. No, you need to talk about it in a meeting or in a brown bag meeting, a brown bag lunch or something like that. You need to get the information out to all the developers, of course, depending on how large your team is, of course, or how large your department is. All right. So that's coding standards. I don't know if anybody's still watching. I don't see any comments. So unit testing and more unit testing. I can't stress unit testing enough, right? Because this is our first line of defense, basically, on fixing bugs that we've written, and or possible bugs, right? So the 100% of the projects I work on do not even come close to 75% code coverage. And the reason I bring up 75% code coverage, because when I was working with the PM at Microsoft for 2 years on IntelliCode, which Jason talked about, which why that isn't in .NET Core and .NET 5 is beyond me. I know they are supposedly working on it, but I don't know what the heck is going on. But it's completely frustrating that they haven't made this available. The Visual Studio team hasn't made this available in .NET Core and .NET 5. But when I was working with PM, that's what he said. He said 75% code coverage is like the minimum goal you should go for, right? Anything public should be 100% of any public method should be covered, right? The private methods hopefully are being covered by the public methods, but 100% of the public methods need to be covered, or don't release it, or you have problems, and that's why I'm becoming very, very stringent on the code I release in my open source projects, that anything new has to have a unit test. And we're going back, one of my friends is helping, we're going back and writing unit tests for the older stuff. Cyclomatic complexity. I don't have enough time to get into this, because I could talk about this for half an hour. But if you have something like Code Rush, you can set it up to tell you while you're writing your code the cyclomatic complexity of that method, right? And if you don't know what cyclomatic complexity is, please go look it up, because it's super important. Because what that number means is the minimum, to me, what the cyclomatic complexity number means is the minimum number of unit tests I need to write for that single method, right? And this is why I love IntelliTest, because it will basically write the scaffolding for you, because it tries to break your code. And Jason showed that. And so this is the minimum number, right? So if your method has a cyclomatic complexity, one single method of 25, that means you need 25 unit tests to test one method, right? How many? I've yet to see a method have 25 unit tests. I just don't see it, because there's, at least in .NET Core and .NET 5, there's no easy way to do that. And so we write what we think we know. Maybe we use the new testing stuff in Visual Studio to tell us, but we really need the IntelliTest to help us with this. So, for example, one project I worked on a while ago, a single class, or a recent project I worked on, a single class in this project had a cyclomatic complexity. No, I'm sorry, I'm getting mixed up. This project had this project had a cyclomatic complexity of 20,675. Sorry, I'm laughing. I'm getting punch drunk. I've been up so long. But only had 249 unit tests. I'm sorry, I'm laughing. This is just unacceptable, right? So that's the number. If you see 20,000, that means you need 20,000 unit tests. And I've never seen anything have 20,000 unit tests. So you need to pay attention to your cyclomatic complexity and make sure everything's covered with unit tests. One project I worked on about 10 years ago, when we had over 1 million lines of code. And when I started the company, it had 0 unit tests. When I left the company 4.5 years later, it had 0 unit tests because, they would never give us the time to do unit testing because they didn't see the value. My boss, who actually took one of my classes at the university here, actually said, and it upset me because he has taken my classes before I started working there. When I asked this, one of the first meetings at this company, I said, why don't we have any unit tests? And my boss said, well, it's okay. We'll just let QA find it. Oh, I couldn't believe it. I wanted to slap him upside the head. I'd be fired right away if I did, but I can't believe that comment. And so 4.5 years later, no unit tests. So another company I worked at, a couple of days after I started, this was a couple of years ago, they literally came up to me and said, and we had a very small team. There was 2 developers and 2 managers. That's it, right? And one of the managers came up to me because we all worked in the same office. And he came up to me and said, Dave, we're going to give you admin access to AWS so you can push code into production. And I said, how many unit tests do you have? They said 0. I said, nope. Don't give me access. I don't want access, because I don't want to be responsible for pushing code that hasn't been tested, right? And so I said, nope. So the whole time I worked there, which turned out to be not very long, I didn't have access because I refused to do it. I let this, if the managers want to take, responsibility for, testing, pushing code that has not been tested, go for it, but I'm not going to do it. So now one of the things I always do based on some companies I've worked at, because a lot of companies won't give you the time to do unit testing, documentation, things like that. You know what? I just don't tell them anymore. I just roll that into my estimates and that's the estimate. And I've worked at companies and they said, Dave, why are your estimates so much longer than everybody else's? I said, because of this. I roll in unit testing and documentation, and that's why my estimates are, longer. Deal with it. So, and unit tests must also include tests for encapsulation. This is what IntelliTest did. You must test encapsulation 100%. I've said many, many times before that I rarely see code that does even encapsulation correctly. And if I see code that doesn't do encapsulation correctly, then I have little hope they're doing inheritance correctly, and I have 0 hope they're doing polymorphism correctly. So we got to get encapsulation right. And I've said in conferences before that if every developer out there did proper encapsulation, I would stop speaking. I promise. So that hasn't happened. So I'm still speaking. Test business logic, like Jason said. Not only do you have to test 100% of the encapsulation, but you need to also roll in your business logic testing too. And you must use random data as input. Too many people, test data with known values that they know work, right? Wrong. You don't do that because that will cause problems. I guarantee it. And that's actually why, I created an open source project on the NuGet package that you can go see that it does this. The whole purpose of this project is to create random data, classes, collections, all these kind of things for you. I use it in everything I do now because it helps me test this kind of information with completely random data, right? Which will break code. I know there's a lot of database people out there, and they test their code, it works fine, and then one of your users has a last name that has an apostrophe in it, right? Breaks the query, right? This is what I'm talking about. And your unit test must, because a lot of teams are or should be moving to continuous integration, And you really need to think about how you're doing your unit tests and doing stuff like this, because it has to run in GitHub, right? Or some other system, right? So your unit tests must be reproducible in continuous integration builds, right? Because otherwise it won't work, you know. And this is actually something I'm going through right now with my open source project. Is I've tested everything myself and everything works great, but when you put it into CI builds, some of it starts falling down, and I've had to go back and rewrite some of my unit tests. So my tip for this section is do not ever commit code that doesn't pass 100% of the unit tests. So, you know, if some developer checks in code and they haven't run the unit test locally, you need to, you know, give them a red flag or some, I don't know what it's called, but you please don't check in code if you haven't run a unit test. That's what they're there for, right? Just don't, oh, I changed this one little thing, it'll be fine, I'll just commit it, you know, commit it to the main branch. No, run a unit test first. And this is where, of course, continuous integration can help. All right, what's next? Continuous integration. Tom's still watching, so I know the one person is watching my keynote. So continuous integration in software engineering basically, to me, just means that everything's being built in the cloud somewhere and you're running your unit tests, right? Every check-in, you know, creates, I mean, every commit to the branch creates a build, and then hopefully that build's also running a unit test, because you need to find out right away there's a problem, right? So the developer can go fix it right away. I've been on teams where I basically have been dead in the water for a day because some beginner, you know, checked in code that wasn't tested, breaks the build, and we're all sitting around going, yeah, there's not much I can do until the build's fixed, right? So this is really where in continuous integration, you know, it's just this loop of test, build, release, source control, developer, reporting. This has to happen on every commit to the branches, right? Because this is how you find out the issues right away. And like Woody was saying, you need to find the issues out immediately, not days later or hours later even, right? Because it can be catastrophic sometimes. So some of the common practices, you know, I'm going to go through this kind of quick because I know I'm short on time. So maintaining a single source repository, of course, automate the build, super, super important. Every commit should create a build, which is easy to do in GitHub. And make sure build self-testing, very, very important, right? Because I think, I forget if it was Jason or what he said it, that, you know, most of the stuff should be automated. You know, the manual days of doing this is gone, and we need to automate this. And this is how continuous integration helps. And, you know, I'm really happy that, you know, at least the team at GitHub is continuously, you know, making this process better for us. I'm not in love with these YAML files and stuff, but, you know, at least, you know, they are making things better for us. You know, commit to the main line every day. Every commit should build the machine on an integration machine, or, you know, however you're doing it, but, you know, it needs to be built on a clean machine. And that's one thing I really like about like building in GitHub, is that you're basically creating a brand new instance from scratch every time you do a build. And so that will, you know, using continuous integration will really uncover some issues with your code just by doing a continuous integration. So if your project isn't in there, be prepared. Once you start trying to do this, it's going to create some work on you. And this helps you fix broken builds immediately, because like I said, this can waste hours of time, and, you know, and that can really add up time, not only, you know, loss of features, but it can be very costly. You keep the builds fast, of course. You can test and clone a production environment. That's a lot harder to set up, especially in the cloud, but you need to do this. You know, environments, I'm going to be talking about environments next, but, you know, they must be easily reproducible, hopefully by just running a script. And it makes everybody, you know, easy to get the latest executable, and everybody sees what's happening. All this stuff is reported, so you can see what's happening, and, you know, your boss can see what's going on and see who's breaking a build and give them a ding at the end of the week, I guess. I don't know. And of course, if you go into the automatic deployment, you can do that too. I haven't really done this too much yet because I don't know. I'm old school and I'm afraid of just letting it happen automatically without somebody saying okay. But this can be important for certain things too. And like I said, doing this will uncover many issues with the code and projects. And every team I work on and help set up their continuous integration, that's exactly what happens. We have to spend quite a bit of time usually fixing the code so it'll work, it will work in continuous integration. Because it always works on my machine. Well, with continuous integration, you don't have your machine anymore. It's created for you on every build. All right. So that's enough about continuous integration. Next is application testing. I know we've had a lot of talk about testing during the conference. So again, I'm going to try to go through this pretty quick. But, anything before it's released to UAT or production has to have end-to-end testing, right? That's all there is to it. This must be done before the release, right? And things are better these days as opposed to a bunch of people all sitting in one room trying to do it all together. A lot of this can be automated, thankfully now, from the old days. But this has to be done with every release. And you can't just you just can't change one little bit of code and put it out. It has to go through testing. Once any code is tested, it starts the whole, cycle over again about testing, building testing, user acceptance testing, all that kind of stuff. And this includes all layers. I'm calling this out because it doesn't matter what layer you're on, whether it's the UI, communications database, or whatever. Everything needs to be tested before you do a major release. And of course, I've said this over and over again, automate as much as possible. There's tons of tools out there. If you hire the right QA people who really love doing this automation, they're worth every penny. I've worked on a couple teams where, I've had a really, really good QA automation person. And man, those people that really know how to do that well are very, very valuable. And of course, regression testing. Regression testing is rerunning functional and non-functional tests to ensure the previous developed software still performs like it did, right? So again, before any major release, you need to do regression testing. Make sure you didn't screw something up. I don't think very many companies do this anymore because, one version something works and the next version something doesn't work. And I'm talking to you, Visual Studio, and other applications out there too. And so this is why regression testing is super, super important to catch these things. And developers should never participate in this kind of testing, right? We are not part of this. I mean, the actual testing part. We can help them out with issues and things like that, but we should not be testing our code like this. The way we test our code is unit testing. Everything else is done by somebody else because we're the worst people to test it because we know how it works. So we are the worst people to test code like this. So make sure you have a great QA team, available to do this, right? And a very knowledgeable team and knowledgeable about the project. And, I'm going to keep talking about documentation, but this is why documentation is important because, how can the QA people test it if it's not documented? Are they just supposed to guess how it's supposed to work, right? There's no feature requirements. There's no architecture. There's no documentation. How are they supposed to test it? Please tell me. I don't get it. All right. Next, proper environments. I'm talking to the choir here, hopefully, but I do want to quickly go over proper environments because especially the last company I worked at, this was a nightmare. So you must have multiple testing environments for your code, right? And of course, there's the dev environment, and that's just for developers. Only for developers. And this is where we can test something on a, in the cloud or in the server or something like that. I'm not talking about our local box. I'm talking about a dev box. That's, of course, all these environments should be near to production as possible, right? Even the dev box. And so depending on the project, you need to at least have dev, QA, and production. And for larger projects and larger teams, You can also have staging and UAT, and we'll go over those, right? But the one thing I do want to point out, and I know this is pretty easy to do in Azure, is a lot of teams, what they do is they do separate builds. They do a dev build, they do a QA build, they do staging build, and they do a production build. This is really the wrong way to do it, if you ask me, because everything QA and above should be release, right? The release type of build. And so the right way to move your code is to move them from environment to environment, not a completely separate build, right? So the QA build, when that's been accepted, should move to the staging UAT environment, right? The exact same code, right? You might have to change the configuration, but the exact same code should move from QA to staging, right? And then once that's accepted, then that's moved to production, right? You don't go from dev to production, right? You use the exact same code build in these different environments, right? And it's super important to do this. And like I said, I know this is pretty easy to do on Azure. I don't know about AWS, but I know it's pretty easy to do on Azure. So the minimum proper environments, of course, the dev environment, I just talked about this, only used by developers, because we're always screwing things up and trying things. And, we don't want to block QA and the other teams by our screwing around with stuff. So, and of course, this will also, this will also, what was I going to say? I don't know. Somebody's comment threw me off base. But so this is only for developers, but it has to be, not your local box. It has to be something, in the cloud or a server somewhere else. Of course, then, after the dev environment comes a QA environment to be used only by the quality assurance team, right? This is where they start doing their testing, their automated testing, all these kind of things, right? This is the QA environment. And developers should have no access to any environment except for dev, right? QA, UAT, and production, should have zero access to. That's the access for DevOps people. So next is QA, of course. I know a lot of people, already know about QA. Super important to get some good QA people and teams in there. And then, of course, after that comes the UAT or staging environment. And this is where not only the QA people can test, but this is where your top users can start testing too. So they can look at it, so they can, give their okay, before it moves into production, right? Because you want to get the users involved. And so, because we're not the users, right? The users are the users. We're the worst people to test this stuff, because we know how it works, right? We need to have the people that don't know how it works necessarily on to test it. And so that's why the UAT environment is super important. And then, of course, comes production, the final environment. And like I said, engineers should have no access to production at all. And that should only be done by the DevOps people. But the one caveat that I ran into with the last company I worked for is, the problem was, we had logging, so we could find, so we could log the errors and issues and stuff like that. But we had no access to the logs because it was all stored on a server and they wouldn't give us access. So every time I needed access to the log, I had to tell somebody on the team, and they had to contact somebody, in DevOps, and then we had to wait around for a while or a day or more even to get access to a log. And how can we fix things like that in production? It doesn't work. So, make sure you have your logs in the cloud somewhere. Yeah, in all environments. So make sure the logs are easily available to everybody, but especially dev people, right? There's lots of systems out there, Application Insights, Raygun. There's all kinds of systems out there, and it must be web-based so we can easily get to them no matter where we are. But yeah, I could never get access to the production logs. So how am I supposed to fix anything? Kind of crazy. And of course, all environments must be easily reproducible. This is really important and will take some time depending on what you're doing. Is you should basically be able to stand up an entire new environment from scratch by running a script, right? Because doing this manually, like they did at my last job, can take weeks. I'm serious. And And so then we can't test, and then we can't let things move. And it was a nightmare. So this must be easily reproducible. Back in the old days, back in the 90s, we would rebuild machines entirely every night. That's how we did it. And but now we have the cloud, and it's a lot easier. And the last thing I want to talk about is something very important. I think Jason talked some about this, and that's profiling, right? Very important, but rarely done. And so memory profiling is basically, using a memory profile against running code, in near production environment as you can, right? And because, I can tell, we can talk until we blue in the face that this is the right way you should code. This is the right way you should do iDisposable. This is the right way you should do arrays. We can talk about all that, and you can implement it. But the real way to find out really what's happening is running a memory profiler against running code. And like I said, you don't run it on production because it really will slow down production, but you need to have it running on near to production code as possible. And you need to have people use the app, or however the app is used, and run the memory profiler against it. And it gathers all kinds of information. Application Insights actually gathers a lot of this information. But this is what we do locally. Developers do before we release it to QA or user acceptance testing. And this is the only way to find the last bit of memory issues, pinned objects, disposable issues. I even found a bug in one of the HTTP classes from Microsoft that I had to report to them because there was a constant problem happening in one of their types, and I had to tell them to work on it. But I found it. And so this is why this is super important. And 100% of the companies I work for don't do this at all, right? I've never walked into a company and saw a company do this ever in my life. And so when I get there, of course, I do that. But even one company, I said, okay, well, we're close to, release, so I'm going to do some memory profiling. And they said, no, we're not going to pay you for that. Oh, how can I guarantee good code quality if I can't run a memory profile against it? So, I've tried a lot of the memory profilers out there, and the one I like the best actually is called the .NET Memory Profiler from SciTech Software. It's relatively, because memory profilers can be very, very expensive, and but this one is not expensive. And it will pay for itself the very first time you use it. I think it's only like $250 US. And the first time you use it, it'll pay for itself. I guarantee it. And I use this, not enough, unfortunately, in open source projects, but I do try to use it as much as I can. And this is a screen grab from that product. And it will show you all the things you need to, go look at. And you can drill down into the actual type, that actually is causing whatever the problem is. And you can actually, depending what you have turned on, you can actually see what values were in that type when that happened, right? So much valuable information that memory profilers give you. The one caveat, the one thing I should say is not every developer needs this, right? Most teams, you only need one developer that needs a license to this, because memory profiling is very time consuming, and you really have to know what you're looking at. So you know how to drill in and go in and look at things. But it's very time consuming. So if you do this, make sure you don't do it at the very end. You need to start before the end of the project because this can be very time consuming. Going through everything that it produces, depending how long the profile was, it is very time consuming. So all of you companies out there that are afraid to, pony up $250 for every one of your developers, you don't need that. You just need like one or two developers that have a license. So I think everyone should, but you can get away with one or two. So if anybody listens to my words and actually starts doing memory profiling, please let me know. I'd love to know your experience. and go check out .NET Memory Profiler from SciTech Software. I think my mouth is starting to screw up because I've been up so long and talking so much today. So let's do some summary to wrap this up. I know everybody, I think Simon and I are the only ones here for the whole time, but I don't know about you, but I'm really tired. I know Simon probably wants to go to bed. So summary, architecture, and documentation, all these things are very, very important. Coding standards, of course, unit testing, continuous integration, application testing, regression testing, proper environments, and of course, profiling. Every project needs this. I don't care what kind of project it is, it needs these things. Because in the end, you'll not only come up with better products, but your developers will be happier. You can be proud of your project, and that's what it's all about. We want to be proud of our work and be happy where we work and happy with the team. And this is one of the things that helps do that, right? Because if the users are happy, everybody will be happy. I guarantee it. And as I'm talking about this, if your team needs help in any of these things and even more, please contact me, and I can help your team out. This is what I do. I go into teams and fix their stuff. I was going to say crap, but fix their stuff, right? So please, you can email me or you can tweet at me, and I'm more than happy to help your team out. Because this is what I do most of the time these days, and code quality and performance is really what I'm focused on these days. And because I really like helping these things out, because like I said, I have a motive, and that's what the products I use, I want to like, right? And that's not happening much anymore. So this is why all these things and even more, and everything that's been talked about in this conference is very, very important to listen to and do. So we could have a good life and go to the beach. Right, the sun's kind of out today. I could go to the beach after this if I wanted to. So don't forget to pick up a copy of my coding standards book or my code performance book, especially my coding standards book. If you don't have a standard, get a copy and start there and create your own standard, or just use mine. If you want me to add something to it, let me know. I'll put it in. I'm always working on the next version. I put out a edition at the beginning of this year. I really don't plan to put one out probably till next year because I'm working on the code performance book right now. But if you don't have standards, you need to. And of course, my book is a great start to do that. And so thanks for attending the conference. Thanks for, listening to me at the very end of this and listening to the keynote. I know